Maraming salamat, Ma'am Sol. Dr. Dalisay was a former professor of mine in undergraduate course, Anthropology of Disaster. So teacher ko si Ma'am Sol dati. So to give the reactions to Dr. Dalisay's lecture, we have two reactors. First is Assistant Professor of the Department of Geography at the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy here in UP Diliman. His dissertation, In the Shadow of Sweet and Sour Giant, Vulnerabilities, Capacities, and Disaster Risk Reduction in Multi-Ethnic Context, the Case of the Region of Mount Canlaon, from the University Paul Valery, Montpellier. It's in French, so ang hirap basahin. In France, his dissertation was awarded the highest distinction in French universities in France, equivalent to summa cum laude. He served as associate researcher at the institute in a research institute also in France, and assistant editor for Disaster Prevention and Management Journal. His recent and relevant publications include From Marginality to Further Marginalization, Experiences from the Victims of the July 20 Payatas Trash Slide in the Philippines, in Jamba, Journal of Disaster Risk Studies, list of approved South African journals, Living with Increasing Floods, Insights from a Rural Philippine Community in the publication Disaster Prevention and Management, Integrating People Capacities in Disaster Risk Reduction through Participatory Mapping, and a lot more publication. So our first reactor is Dr. Jake Rowe Cadag. A round of applause, please. Also, I would like to introduce the second reactor. He is Professor of Community Development and the Director of the Doctor of Social Development Program of the College of Social Work and Community Development in UP Diliman. Based on a research by the UP Center for Integrative Studies, he is the third with the greatest number of researches and publications on disaster risk reduction in the whole UP system. He is co-editor of an ISI, now Thomson Reuters Index International Journal, Disaster Prevention and Management, based in the UK. He has been engaged as consultant researcher of Asian Center for Disaster Preparedness in Bangkok, International Development Studies in the UK, Oxfam GB, International Recovery Platform in Kobe, Japan. He has completed 2 researches with UNESCO on local and indigenous knowledge on disaster risk reduction in small island and coastal communities. The other research is on participatory disaster recovery planning in earthquake-affected communities in Bohol. For the past 3 years, he has been acting as the resource person on community-based disaster risk reduction by the Japan College of Social Work in relation to the recovery of families affected by tsunami. He is a consultant of the DSWD on vulnerability and adaptation for social protection and of the DPWH in integrating BRR and CCA in infrastructure. Our second reactor is Dr. Emmanuel Luna.
Thank you very much, Jelly. Maraming salamat. Bago ako magsimula, I would like to thank the Third Oral Studies Center for inviting me as one of the reactors. And malaking karangalan sa akin na maging bahagi nito, lalo na ang ating lecturer today is si Ma'am Sol. At kasama kong reactor ay isa sa mga tinuturing kong mentor sa university o sa akademya, si Sir Mel Luna. Malaki ang interest ko sa topic na ito, Tradition of Resilience, the Resiliency of Tradition. As a geographer, as a social scientist, and as an aspiring or wannabe community worker. But compared to Sir Mel and kay Ma'am Sol, hindi pa ganoon kalawak yung aking eksperyensya. As a scientist or as a geographer, I truly believe that these concepts of resilience, tradition, what else? local knowledge, and sense-making, the key words in our topic today. These are the concepts that are very important in our study of disaster and in our practice of disaster risk reduction. Why? As I understand from Ma'am Song's lecture, this local knowledge, the beliefs based on our tradition, these are important determinants of our decision-making and human behaviors in the face of hazards and disasters, or of our resiliency in the face of hazards and disasters. And these concepts, I think these are the explanations to the discriminating impacts of disasters. Hindi lang yung vulnerability, hindi lang yung kahirapan or being poor, being marginalized. Of course, they are important determinants of discriminating impacts of disasters. Pero katulad ng example ni Ma'am Sol kanina about the Moken or the sea gypsies, their local beliefs, their local knowledge, based on tradition, keep them safe from disasters or from hazard, especially unexpected hazards, unexpected from the point of view of us from the lowlands, and especially, but from the point of view of the indigenous people or from traditional communities, those knowledge that we consider superstitious and without basis, those are important knowledge that keep them safe for thousands of years. At bilang isang scientista or social scientist, I think most of us here are from the social science. These local beliefs that we consider, or some of us consider, superstitious or without basis, I think ito yung kailangan palabasin natin sa ating mga studies. Because these are the causes, from my point of view, the causes of disconnect between the local people and the scientists and the government authorities. I'll explain, or I will elaborate that point later. Pagdating sa usapin ng disaster risk reduction at the community level, kasi may ilang experience rin ako sa community-based disaster risk reduction. So, pagdating sa practice sa community, these theoretical or academic arguments, concepts that we discuss in the university, from the perspectives of the local people, those in the community, these are all abstract concepts. In the university nga, we do not have universally agreed definitions of resilience. There are debates among social scientists about the concept of resilience, mas lalo na sa community, especially in the community. So hindi ka maintindihan, or from my experience, in many cases, no? At hindi ko maiwasan kapag nasa community that I talked about resilience, these concepts of vulnerabilities, capacities. Hindi nila ako maintindihan. No. At madalas, from our academic perspectives, local knowledge is also hard to understand. And I think this is the challenge, especially kapag sa community, when people talk about sabi ng matatanda, what else? Masamang kutob, ibong lumilipad, birds flying, animal behavior. These are very, from our perspectives as academicians, these are very subjective, and these are removed from how do I say it, from rigid scientific method or protocol that we follow in the university or in the science. So how do we integrate them in disaster risk reduction? That is the challenge. However, when you look at them closer, this local knowledge, these are the important determinants of human behaviors and decision making, especially in times of crisis. Kaya nga magtataka tayo, di ba? We always wonder, for example, in case ng Yolanda, 1 or 5 or 6 days before Yolanda hit Tacloban, there at the international level, down to the local level, for our scientists, our forecasters were able to predict this typhoon. But the response from the local level did not comply with the suggestions or with the plans of the local of the authority, of the national authority. Why? Because it's the response of the people, the decisions, human behavior do not rely solely on scientific knowledge. There are many factors that are part of their everyday life that determine their decisions. Pero madalas, those what we consider as, lalo na sa media, what we consider as irrational behavior. Madalas, di ba, tinatawag natin in the media, people are being hard-headed. And I think when you search Google, or people are hard-headed in front of disasters or in the face of disasters, marami kang makitang article about that. But it's not about people being hard-headed. It's about their local knowledge, which are not respected in our decision-making at the government level, for example. So, and these are the challenges for us social scientists. I think, how do we integrate this local knowledge in disaster risk reduction? Is it really possible? Actually, I was in Indonesia 2 weeks ago for a conference in cities in Yogyakarta, in cities on volcanoes. I love the theme. The theme was living cities on volcanoes, living in harmony with nature. So the central topic was, one of the central topics was the death of the Meridian or the guardian of the volcano, of the Mirapi volcano. So there was a question especially from foreign visitors. Does it mean that local knowledge by the Meridian and by those people living, because the Meridian died after the eruption, no? Does it mean that local knowledge is not efficient? Does it mean that local knowledge will cause the death of many people? No, the problem or the main question there is, it's not about the efficiency of the belief or the local knowledge of the people or the Meridian and his followers. It's about, I think from my perspective, it's about the non-respect or the non-consideration, the neglect of local knowledge by the local authorities when they plan their contingency plan. They did not consider the local culture. There's not even, there were dialogues with the Meridian, but that's in the middle of the crisis. But in the planning process, the Meridian and his followers were not part of the planning process. And I think this is what Ma'am Sos wants to emphasize in her lecture, to integrate local knowledge, to make disaster risk reduction, and to make those people, real people in the local community, the local people, to be part of disaster risk reduction at all levels, or in all aspects of disaster risk reductions, from risk assessment to action planning. And this can be done through dialogue. However, that is also another challenge. How do we foster dialogue between the scientists or the scientists and the local people with different belief system? And again, I go back to my question and to the question in this, to one of the key questions of this lecture. The integration of local and scientific knowledge, is it really possible? Are there real stories of efficient or of integration of this knowledge? Actually, meron, very few. No? And there are patchy studies about that, but there is not really in the literature. There are patchy studies. Pero how do we institutionalize, or how do we make this local knowledge institutionalized in our practice of disaster risk reduction. That's the challenge, I think. No? Sorry. Okay. Especially, I think there is a lack of methods at the university level on how we study this local knowledge. No? Madalas, in our research study, I don't know from other disciplines, but from what I read in the literature, in disaster literature, most of the methods that we use are extractive in nature. Why extractive? What are the methods that we use in disaster studies? Survey, questionnaire, interview. Those standard academic methods that we use in the academy that we were able to study, and we consider following the scientific method that we study in the university. However, as I said, from my point of view, these methods that we use very often in the community level are very extractive. Why? We gather data, we get out of the university, we publish, and after that, nothing happens in the community. I think that's the real disconnect. No? When we want to integrate local knowledge and scientific knowledge. But what is really happening in the field is a mere extraction of data from the community. No? So I think that we should pursue more to promote this integration of local knowledge and scientific knowledge. We should pursue more participatory action research. Those research that involve the community members in the process. So not extractive, and we can do that using many participatory methods. There are many participatory methods now that are being used in disaster risk reduction, especially at the local level. Kaya lang, hindi pa ganon ka, compared with the usual methods that we use, hindi pa ganon ka institutionalized, and very often questionable yung mga outputs. If that is the case, so how do we promote integration of local knowledge? And again, yung last point ko is the institutionalization of this. How do we institutionalize this local knowledge in disaster risk reduction, especially if the other stakeholders of disasters, the stakeholders of disasters are the local community, the scientists, the government authorities. How do we institutionalize local knowledge and disaster risk reduction? We should involve all these actors in a dialogue. And we can do this using participatory methods. I'm finished. Thank you. Salamat.